بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما تعلمنا وزدنا بفضلك علما وتعليما إنك على كل شيء قدير. So we already know the context for what's going on here. We already know that these are stories, may or may not be true. Excuse me. Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And but these are useful to give a context. So we had the story last week, which was these two people, two brothers. One kills the other, and there's Dhu Ra'ain, who didn't want to be part of it. So he forbade him to do so, but he would not heed. So Dhu Ra'ain, this individual who was against the killing, he made this basically dua against him. Right? That basically if you kill your brother, you will never be able to sleep. He sealed the document and brought it to Amr, saying, "Keep this with you for me." And he did so. Then Amr killed his brother Hassan and returned to the Yemen with his men. One of the Himyarites was moved to say, line of poetry, "In former generations what eyes have seen, the like of Hassan who has been slain. The princes slew him, lest they should be kept at war. On the morrow they said, it is naught, it's all over. Your dead was the best of us, and your living one is Lord over us, while all of you are lords." And then it has these words here. And it says the poem, where is this poem here? That's the poem above. So notice he's saying this poem is spurious. Okay? Whereas there's nothing here, right? So just because you don't have a chain transmission doesn't make it not true, right? There's many things like that, right? So here it mentions has some other lines there, but he's not mentioning anything that Ibn Hisham did not critique these lines and say this doesn't make sense. Okay, we'll skip that. We spoke the last week. It says, when Amr ibn Tibban returned to the Yemen, he could not sleep, right? This reminds us of, I don't know if it comes in other cultures, but reminds us of Macbeth, right? Is everybody familiar with Macbeth? Shakespeare's Macbeth. So Macbeth has killed sleep, right? So, he has insomnia because of the guilt, right? And to what is it? Also, to some extent, not the same, but to some extent, Apocalypse Now. Those of you familiar with Apocalypse Now. So when Amr ibn Tiban returned to the Yemen, he could not sleep, and here we go. Let's make it a little bit bigger. And insomnia took a firm hold of him. Being much concerned at this, he asked the physicians and those of the soothsayers and diviners who were seers about his trouble. One of them said, "No man has ever killed his brother or kinsman treacherously as you killed your brother, without losing his sleep and becoming a prey to insomnia." At this, so notice again their sources of knowledge, soothsayers and diviners, right? People are trying to find out about the future. At this, he began to kill all the nobles who had urged him to murder his brother, right? Much like Macbeth. Till finally he came to Dhu Ra'ain, who claimed that Amr held the proof of his innocence, namely the paper which he had given him. He had it brought to him, and when he had read the verses, he let him go, recognizing that he had given him good counsel. Right? So he says he knows what's going to happen to you. Right? Know that Dhu Ra'ain is blameless, and know that you've killed sleep by killing your brother. When Amr died, the Himyarite kingdom fell into disorder, and his people split into parties. So it says, how Lakhni'a Dhu Shanatir seized the throne of the Yemen. So there's this chaos now, and so somebody came in. A Himyari who had no connection with the royal house, called Lakhni'a Yanuf Dhu Shanatir, arose and killed off their leading men and put the royal family to open shame. Of this man, a certain Himyarite recited, Himyra was killing its sons and exiling its princes, working its shame with his own hands, destroying its worldly property with frivolous thoughts. Even greater was the loss of their religion. So, and what was their religion? We don't know exactly yet. So did their earlier generations bring their doom by acts of injustice and profligacy. Lakhni'a was the most evil man. He was a sodomite, right? He was a active homosexual. He used to summon a young man of the royal family and assault him in a room which he had constructed for this very purpose, so that he could reign, so he could not reign after him. It's very interesting, right? You know, so he said he used to summon the young man. Okay, so he would rape this man. May Allah protect us all. And but that would make that man incapable of reigning thereafter. So presumably then they have a certain system, a legal system, a moral system, a cultural system that, you know, that states that, right? He's doing this for a particular reason, right? And this is something that may Allah, may Allah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will bring justice to on Judgment Day. This was done to African American men as well, right? A way of breaking the morale of the African American slaves was having them raped in front of their families, right? May Allah, bring justice and make us a means of bringing justice upon all. Anyway, so this is the way that he would abase somebody. He then used to go from this upper chamber of his to his guards and soldiers who were below, having put a toothstick in his mouth to let them know that he had accomplished his purpose. So T, this means at-Tabari. So Tabari is narrating with a different chain back to Ibn Ishaq. Then he would release him and he would appear before the guards and people utterly disgraced. Right. One day he sent for Zur'a Dhu Nawas, the son of Tibban As'ad, the brother of Hassan. He was a little boy when Hassan was murdered, and he had become a fine, handsome young man of character and intelligence. When the messenger came, he perceived what was intended, and took a fine, sharp knife and hid it under the sole of his foot, and went to Lakhni'a. As soon as they were alone, he attacked him, and Dhu Nawas rushed upon him and stabbed him to death. He then cut off his head and put it in the window. Right? So, homosexuality, which is not a new thing, right? And also the use of it, right? They know that like the use of it as um, um, it's quite a complex, quite a complex social and psychological thing. But Allahu alam, if you see, its use here, a way to abase people, a way to, ultra assert oneself. I wish Brother Muhammad Sadiq was one of my colleagues at Hikmah School. He's talking about it and its role in society and what does it mean and what does it reflect. So homosexuality, be it, and lesbianism, these are things that can only exist as a widespread thing in extremely luxurious societies. But in other societies, it can be used as it's an expression of um, extreme masculinism, or not real masculinism, but fake masculinism, and put in its wrong place, right? It's a very strange thing. So he stuck the toothpick in his mouth and went out to the guards, who in coarse language inquired what had happened. Um, Ask that head, he replied. They looked at the window, and there was Lakhni'a's head cut off. So they went in pursuit of Dhu Nawas and said, you must be our king and no one else, seeing that you have rid us of this disgusting fellow. Right. It says point 29. Okay. The reign of Dhu Nawas. They made him king, and all the tribes of Himyar joined him. He was the last of the Yemeni kings, and the man who had the ditch made. So this Dhu Nawas was the person who made the ditch. He was called Joseph and reigned for considerable time. So exactly, yeah. So there's, if you look in Surah Al-Buruj, you look at Tafsir, there's different explanations of this, right? And there's a long hadith about it. So we'll see some of it here, wallahu alam. So he was the people of the ditch. So he was called Joseph and reigned for some considerable time. So now he's going to go into that tangent. He says, in Najran, which was to the east, there were some people who held the religion of Isa ibn Maryam, a virtuous and upright people who followed the gospel. Their head was named Abdullah ibn Thamir. The place where that religion took root was in Najran, at that time the center of the Arabs' country. Its people, indeed the rest of the Arabs, were idolaters. A Christian by the name of Faymuyin had settled there and converted the people to its religion. So now he's going to go into that story. It says Mughira ibn Abu Labib, a free man of Akhnas, on the authority of Wahb ibn Munabbih, Tabi'i, is one of the Tabi'i, the Yemeni, told me that the origin of Christianity in Najran was due to a man named Faymiyun, who was a righteous, earnest, and ascetic man whose prayers were answered. He used to wander between towns. As soon as he became known in one town, he moved to another, eating only what he earned, for he was a builder by trade using mud bricks. He used to keep Sunday as a day of rest and would not work then. He used to go into the desert place and pray there until evening. While he was following his trade in a Syrian village, so when you say Syrian village, you mean in Asham, in Greater Syria, withdrawing himself from men, one of the people there called Salih perceived what manner of man he was and felt a violent affection for him. So that unperceived by Fayyum, he used to follow him from place to place until one Sunday he went, as was his wont, out to the desert, followed by Salih. Salih chose a hiding place and sat down where he could see him, not wanting him to know he was there. As Fayyum stood prayer in Tinin, I'm not quite sure. Oh, Tinin. Tinin literally means a dragon. So a Tinin, a seven-horned snake, came towards him, and when Fayyum saw it, he cursed it and it died. Seeing the snake, but not knowing what happened to it, and fearing for Fayyum's safety, Saleh could not contain himself and cried out, Fayyum, a tinin is upon you. He took no notice and went on with his prayers until he had ended. Night had come and he departed. He knew that he had been recognized, and Saleh knew that he had been seen. So he said to him, Faymuyun, you know that I have never loved anything as much as I love you, not in a homosexual way, just in a normal, right, love for righteousness. I want to always be with you and go wherever you go. He replied, as you will. You know how I live, and if you feel that you can bear the life, well and good. So Saleh remained with him, and the people of the village were on the point of discovering his secret. For when a man suffering from a disease came in his way, by chance, he prayed for him, and he was cured. But if he was summoned to a sick man, he would not go. Now, one of the villagers had a son who was blind. There's a little footnote here. Or sick, it says. And he asked about Faymiyun and was told that he never came when he was sent for, but that he was a man who built houses for people for a wage. Thereupon the man took his son and put him in his room and threw a garment over him and went to Faymiyun, saying that he wanted him to do some work for him in his house, and would he come and look at it, and they would agree on a price. Arrived at the house, Faymiyun asked what he wanted done, and after giving details, a man suddenly whisked off the covering from the boy and said, "O Faymiyun, one of God's creatures is in the state that you see, so pray for him." Faymiyun did so, and the boy got up entirely healed. Knowing that he had been recognized, he left the village, followed by Saleh, and while they were walking through Syria, meaning the Levant, they passed by a great tree, and a man called from it, saying, "I've been expecting you," and saying, "When he is coming," until I heard your voice and knew it was you. Don't go until you have prayed over my grave, for I am about to die. He did die, and he prayed over him until they buried him. Then he left, followed by Saleh, until they reached the land of the Arabs, who attacked them, and a caravan carried them off and sold them in Najran as slaves. At this time, the people of Najran followed the religion of the Arabs, worshipping a great palm tree there. So that's the first instance where you see them worshipping a tree, right? Usually we hear them worshipping an idol, right, that are gods. Every year they had a festival when they hung on the tree every fine garment they could find and women's jewels. Then they sallied out and devoted a day to it. Faymayun was sold to one noble and Salih to another. And now it happened that Faymayun was praying earnestly at night in a house which his master had assigned to him, and the whole house was filled with light, so that it shone as if it were within a lamp. His master was amazed at the sight and asked him about his religion. Faymayun told him, and he said that they were in error. As for the palm tree, it could neither help nor hurt. And if it were to curse, and if he were to curse the tree in the name of God, he would destroy it, for he was God alone without companion. Then do so, said his master, for if you do that, we shall embrace your religion and abandon our present faith. After purifying himself and performing 2 rak'ahs, which is interesting, that they used to pray in the same way that we pray, Wallahu alam, he invoked God against the tree, and God sent a wind against it, which tore it from its roots and cast it to the ground. Then the people of Najran adopted his religion, and he instructed them in the law of Isa ibn Maryam. Afterwards, they suffered the misfortunes which befell their co-religionists in every land. This was the origin of Christianity in Najran, in the land of the Arabs. Such is the report of Wahb ibn Munabbih, that tabi'i, right, on the authority of the people of Najran. So that's their story. Then it says, now we're going back to the people of the trench. So he says, Yazid ibn Ziyad told me on the authority of Muhammad ibn Ka'b al-Quradhi, one of the tabi'in, and also a man of Najran, also told me that according to his people, they used to worship idols. Najran is the largest town in which the people of the neighboring district congregated, and in a village hard by there was a sorcerer who used to instruct the young men of Najran in his art. When Faymayun came there, they did not call him by name, by the name that Wahb bin Munabbih gives him, but simply said a man came there. So he's being accurate, right? He's saying they didn't use the word Faymayun, right? So this indicative that there's some kind of accuracy here, right? Albeit the chain of transmission is the people of Najran, right? Which is not a chain transmission. It's folklore, basically. Now, the people of Najran used to send their young men to that sorcerer to be taught sorcery, and Athamir sent his son Abdullah along with them. When he passed by the man in the tent, he was immensely struck by his prayers and devotion, and began to sit with him and listen to him until he became a Muslim. So this whole story has a totally different chain, right? The whole chain of the whole story, it comes in a Sahih hadith somewhere else. So it's a similar kind of story, but it's slightly totally different source. Excuse me. I'm pretty sure it's in Riyadh al-Salihin, so I'm pretty sure it's Sahih. Is it in the sixth? Is it? And it's going to be in the sixth book somewhere. Is it in Bukhari Muslim? I'm not sure. Yeah, we'll see. Let's see how it's narrated here. And he would sit and listen until he became Muslim and acknowledged the unity of God and worshipped him. He asked questions about the laws of Islam, meaning the religion, until when he became fully instructed therein, he asked the man, what was the great name of God? Although he knew it, he kept it from him, saying, my dear son, you will not be able to bear it. I fear that you are not strong enough. Now Athamir had no idea that his son Abdullah was not visiting the sorcerer along with the other young men. Abdullah, seeing that his master had kept the knowledge from him and was afraid of his weakness, collected a number of sticks, and whenever he taught him a name of God, he wrote that name on a stick. And when he had got them all, he lit a fire and began to throw them in one by one, until when he reached the stick with the great name inscribed on it, he threw it in, and it immediately sprang out untouched by the fire. Thereupon he took it and went and told his master that he knew the great name by which he had concealed from him. The latter questioned him, and when he learned how he had found out the secret, he said, "Oh, my young man, my friend, you have got it, but keep it to yourself. Though I do not think you will." Thereafter, when Abdullah bin Thamir entered Najran and met any sick person, he would say to him, "O servant of God, will you acknowledge the unity of God and adopt my religion so that I may pray to God that he may heal you of your affliction?" The man would agree, acknowledge the unity of God and become a Muslim, and he would pray for him and he would be healed. Until in the end there was not a single sick person in Najran but had adopted his religion and become whole from his sickness. When the news reached the king, he sent for him and said, "You have corrupted the people of my town so that they are against me and have opposed my religion and the religion of my fathers. I will make a terrible example of you." He replied, You have not the power to do that." The king had him taken to a high mountain and thrown down headlong, but he reached the ground unhurt. Right? So there's different stories there, right? So where is this hadith? Allahumma akfini. So this hadith is totally different source, right? So here again, this is coming from folklore from the people of Najran. Allahumma akfini. Allahumma akfinihim bima shit. Here we go. So this hadith is in Sahih Muslim. So yeah, slightly different things. So here, for example, that the Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so here he's mentioning that he in Sahih Muslim, it mentions it's slightly different. They make them that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes the mountain shake and they fall off and he doesn't. Right? I'm just going to see in the beginning, and it mentions as well, mentions that he's going one day to the rahib, to the monk. He calls him a monk, right? And the other day to the magician. And then it also mentions the whole issue about how does he know? There's nothing about a fire. It's mentioning about killing an animal, right? So it's so basically we have the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ in Sahih Muslim, and what we see here is not that hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, but rather if you look at the chain again, it's Yazid ibn Ziyad saying that Muhammad al-Ka'b al-Quradi and another man of Najran said that according to his people they used to do this, right? So this is folklore of Najran versus the hadith, right? So that's why there's a distinction here, right? Jazakallah khair. So this doesn't have to be wrong, right? It's just if there's when there's clear contrast, like what's the phrase? What's the phrase in you couldn't put it together. Um, like the information clearly contradicts one another. It's what's the word? No, it's called there's a phrase for it in something. I forget it. Anyway, you couldn't put it's not possible at all. So, but otherwise, you have a report here from the Prophet ﷺ. Obviously, that's revelation, and it's Sahih, it's in Sahih Muslim. And then you have this folklore. Maybe some of the folklore is right. Some of the details are extra, right? So that's how we look at the Bible. When we're looking at the Bible, we're going to look at the Bible and it says, okay, there's certain things that are in the Bible that are in the Quran, certain things in the Bible that are in Hadith, certain things in the Bible that as long as there's nothing wrong in that, it could be true, right? And so there might be certain details here that could be true, right? Okay. Then he had him thrown down into a deep water in Najran, from which no one had ever emerged, but he came out safely. Having thus got the better of him, Abdullah told him that he would not be able to kill him. So there's three things in the hadith, and here it mentions two. He would not be able to kill him until he acknowledged the unity of God and believed in his religion. But that if he did that, he would be given. So in the hadith, it mentions, you can only kill me by saying, Bismillahi Rabbil Ghulam, in the name of Allah, the Lord of the boy. Here it mentions he has to actually accept the deen itself. The king then acknowledged the unity of God and pronounced the creed of Abdullah, and hitting him with a moderate bow with a stick which he had in his hand, he killed him and died himself on the spot. Hmm? So who died? He killed him and died himself. Oh, because he mentions that he dies as well. The king dies as well. That's interesting. That's not in the hadith, I think. The people of Najran accepted the religion of Abdullah ibn Thamir according to the gospel and the law of Isa ibn Maryam brought. Afterwards, they were overcome by misfortunes which befell their co-religionists. Such is the origin of Christianity in Najran, but God knows the best what the facts are. Notice how he's phrasing it. He's saying, I don't know. Wallahu alam. Such is the report of Muhammad ibn Ka'ab al-Quradi and one of the men of Najran about Abdullah ibn Thamir, but God knows best what happened. So now what's going to happen? So Dhunuwas came against them with his armies and invited them to accept Judaism. So notice there's a conflation now of the stories. So the Ashab al-Ukhdud, we know Ashab al-Ukhdud as the king, right? And does that come in the hadith as well? I'm pretty sure it comes. So that's one part of Ashab al-Ukhdud. Yes. So in the hadith in the hadith in Sahih Muslim, it mentions now that Ashab al-Ukhdud is part of that same story. So now the king does not die, but rather now forces the rest of the people to leave monotheism and throws them all in the fire, right? And then it mentions the baby saying, "Mama, don't worry, it's okay, right? We're on the truth." Okay, that's what we find in Sahih Muslim. Here, it's a different story. So far, nobody's been thrown into fires, and rather the king died at that point. So now, the way it mentions it here is totally different. Okay, now it's totally different. So it says, Yazid ibn Ziyad, we did this part here. So now Dhunawas, who's that man who killed the homosexual, came against them with his armies and invited them to accept Judaism, right? We already know why they became Jews, right? Because you already did that story. Giving them the choice between that or death. They chose death, so he hung trenches for them, burnt them in fire, slew them with the sword, and mutilated them until he had killed nearly 20,000 of them, right? So it's a totally different thing. So here it mentions the Nawas burning them and not the king burning the people, etc. Okay, concerning the Nawas and that army of his, God revealed to his apostle. Concerning the Nawas and that army of God, one of the trenchmen. Concerning the Nawas. Oh, okay. I thought it was quoting poetry, like what is talking about. This is now quoting. So now quoting the verse in Surah Al-Buruj, right? So as on the trench makers be eternal ire for their fuel-fed fire, watching as the flames grew higher, the sufferings. Huh? So he's done a really, really, really liberal translation of Surah Al-Buruj, right? So he says, قُتِلَ أَصْحَابُ الْأُخْدُودِ, right? النار ذات الوقود إذ هم عليها قعود, right? Which is, so it's a really, watching is إذ هم Yeah, it's a really, really liberal translation, right? That's what he's trying to make a kind of poetic, super liberal translation. وَمَا نَقَمُوا مِنْهُمْ إِلَّا يُؤْمِنُوا بِاللَّهِ الْعَزِيزِ الْحَمِيدِ. So that's correct. And they only tormented them because they believed in God, the worthy to be praised, i.e., that's not a reason. Right? So he just, but the first part is an extremely loose translation of the verse. That's why I was confused. I thought it was quoting poetry. That's why I thought what was going on. It is said that among those put to death by Dhu Nawas was Abdullah ibn Thamir, the leader and the imam. I was told by Abdullah ibn Bakr ibn Muhammad ibn Amr ibn Hazm that he was told that in the days of Umar al-Khattab, a man of Najran dug up some of the ruins of Najran, intending to make use of the land. When they came upon Abdullah ibn Thamir under a grave, he was in a sitting posture and had his hand covering a wound on his head, and found firmly and holding firmly on it. When his hand was removed, the blood began to flow, and when they let go of his hand, it returned to its place, and the flow of blood ceased. On his finger was a ring inscribed, Allah is my Lord. A report was sent to Omar, and he replied, leave him alone and cover the grave, and his orders were duly carried out, right? Because he's a shaheed, he died as a shaheed, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the earth does not consume, the body of a shaheed does not decompose. Okay, so wallahu alam. So here, this is for a story, and it mentions I was told by Abu Bakr. So this is a thiqa. This is well known. I believe Abdullah ibn Abu Bakr ibn Muhammad ibn Amr ibn Hazm. This is one of the shuyukh of Imam Malik, reliable source, right? Okay, so that's that story there. Of Dos Dhu Tha'laban and the beginning of the Abyssinian domination and the history of Aryat, who became the viceroy of Al-Yemen. So now we're talking about the Abyssinians, the Ethiopians taking over Yemen, which is going to lead to Am al-Fil, right, the year of the elephant. So a man of Saba called Dos Dhu Tha'laban escaped on a horse and taking to the desert eluded them. So so basically this person took over. There's a who is it Dhu Nawas took over, and there's one person who didn't want to be a part of them. So right, he pressed on until he reached the Byzantine court, and when he asked the emperor to aid him against Dhu Nawas and his troops, telling him that what had happened, the latter replied that his country was too distant for him to be able to help him by sending troops, but that he would write to the Abyssinian king, who was a Christian and whose territory was near the Yemen. Accordingly, he did write, ordering him to help Dos and seek revenge. Right. So basically, against an attack against Dhu Nawas in Yemen, who has now taken over the whole area. Dos went to Negus, right? Who is the head of the Abyssinians, with the emperor's letter, and he sent with him 70,000 Abyssinians, putting over them a man called Aryat. And so it says, Tabari, he ordered him to kill a third of the men, lay waste a third of the country, and seize a third of the women and children if he conquered. So notice this concept of taking women and children as captive, right? This is a thing that we find in the Bible. We find it here in tradition, right? And we're going to see it later on in the Sira. So it's not something that is like a kind of an Islamic thing or something like that. That's not the case. It's just part of that's just how society worked and how war worked, right? Okay. With the army, there was a man called Abraha, which means split face. Al-Ashram, Abraha al-Ashram, the split face. I think he has what's it called, split lip. So anyway, so this person called Aryat, he was in charge, and Abraha was not in charge. Aryat crossed the sea with Dos, Dhu Tha'laban, and landed in Yemen. Dhu Nawas with the Himyarites and such of the Yemeni tribes as were under his command came out against him, and after an engagement, Dhu Nawas and his force was put to flight. They ran away. Seeing that his cause was lost, Dhu Nawas turned his horse towards seawards, beating it until it entered the waves and carried him through the shallows into the deep water. He committed suicide. This was the last that was seen of him. Aryat entered the Yemen and took possession of it. So now it's under Abyssinian control. Carried out the Negus' order and sent a third of the women and children to him. He stayed on in the country and reduced it to its subjugation. One of the Yemenis, remembering how Dos had brought the Abyssinians upon them, said, basically, you've, in order to get vengeance upon somebody who's taken over the whole country, you have now given our country to somebody else. Right? Not like Dos and not like the things he carried in his saddlebag. Right? I don't be like that. Right? And many people do these kind of things, right? And this saying had become proverbial in Yemen until this day. Dhu Ja'dan, the Himyari, right? So this is kind of an interesting thing, right? So you say like folklore is folklore, right? Okay, what about sayings? So there's a saying in your language. A saying, a phrase, you know, yes, it's part of folklore, but it does not have any historical weight, right? Like, doesn't it mean something? The fact that you have a phrase like that, right? It means that some of these things happened, or at least it's part of your folklore, right? So the idea that you dismiss all folklore as pointless is not very useful at all, right? But rather you just take it with a grain of salt or a bag of salt, that's all. There's a difference between looking at something with disdain, right, and just ignoring something versus, you know, um, totally ignoring something. Like stories of dragons and things like that, right? People talk about dragons and monsters and these kind of things. You say all of it is made up and all of it is stupid. Really? Did our forefathers not fight dragons and monsters? Right? Didn't our forefathers deal with mammoths and saber-toothed tigers and cave lions and you know, particularly in South America, right? There's a lot of the fauna, right? Large, huge prehistoric animals were in South America till quite late. So, it's not all crazy, right? All folklore is all crazy. It's not really fair to say, right? There's obviously extremes. Atlantis must exist because Plato spoke about it. It's not necessarily true, but it's also not necessarily false, right? To look at it and say, well, that would be ridiculous, right? That would be ridiculous that something in the past was so advanced, right? You know, we can't be, it's base your whole life on stories that may or may not be true. That's wrong. But to have total disdain for all stories and see that they have no truth in them whatsoever is not fair. That's not a fair way to work at things. Wallahu a'lam. Okay, so Dhu Jadan the Himyari, and then recording their humiliation after their former glory and Iraq's destruction of their castles, Silhin, Baynun, and Ramdan, unique in their splendor, recited gently. Tears cannot recall what is sped. Fret not thyself for those who are dead. After Baynun no stones nor trace remain, and after Silhin shall men build houses again? Right? Baynun, Silhin, and Ramdan are Yemeni castles which Arat destroyed, and none like them existed. So you have to understand that the beginning of civilization and agriculture, right, is in the Middle East. Okay, so I remember doing, Jordanian. One of the courses I had to do at University of Jordan was Introduction to Jordanian archaeology, and there's like huge things going back thousands of years, right? So, um, you know, it's pretty amazing what they kind of did in the past, right? So, and what's very interesting is for those people that are interested in history and archaeology, is I think it was a year ago or 2 years ago they found this very, very old building in somewhere in Indonesia. So as far as I know, things in the Middle East go back about like beginning 10,000 years ago, right? And so you can kind of make a kind of, and that also fits with ideas of global climate stability. So basically, until about 10,000 years ago, it wasn't even possible to start a civilization because there wasn't stability in the climate. So you didn't have, let's say, for example, the ability to kind of like crack how to grow crops in Egypt or in Mesopotamia or in the Levant and those kind of things, or in the Indus Valley. That wasn't a thing because there wasn't an Indus Valley culture, because there wasn't a stable climate. Things weren't stable enough. So basically, you had to be a hunter-gatherer, and being stable was pointless. Um, but what's interesting, so there's this book, Climate Change in Prehistory. I can't remember the author, but he mentions basically every 10,000 years there was some level of stability. So from what I recall, and I think this is in Science magazine, was about 2 or 3 years ago, they found this basically evidences of civilization in somewhere in the jungle in Indonesia, and that's about 25 to 30,000 years old, which sets the clock back really, really far, right? And it changes things drastically. You know, even if you go to the King's List, right? Look at the King's List of the ancient Egyptians, right? You look at the kind of dates and the numbers; it all looks stupid, it looks silly, right? But what if they're real? What if they weren't lying? It's not true that everybody lies all the time, right? Many people lie often, but it doesn't mean that everybody lies all the time. It's not necessarily. So the King's Lists, if we look at the King's Lists in ancient Egypt as real, right? And indeed, if you look at the pyramids, a lot of these things are really, really old. They're probably much older than 10,000 years, more like 30,000 years, right? Which kind of like, you know, helps us kind of look at things in a different picture. Wallahu alam. Um, khair. It's funny. I was considering doing a class in a PhD yeah um, in is it archaeology? Yeah, archaeology and like Semitic languages. And so I was reaching out to these various Western universities, and I was saying, I'm in Jordan. They're like, why are you asking us if there's this university in Jordan when you have like the best specialists on this right now? You know, so it's quite an interesting world to look at. Allahu A'lam. Khair. 7:15. Okay. That was eight. Let me double check. Give me 1 second, please. Okay, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. So anyway, all of these things are, these are all very useful and part of our big picture. And my point was to ignore all folklore and all stories and all phrases, right? Is not fair. It's not to rely on it 100% is ridiculous, but to ignore them all is also ridiculous. Okay, khair. Okay, so we did this. Um, okay, so he says. Okay, line of poetry. And then he continued, and let's see what he says here. He says, Peace confound you. You can't turn me for my purpose. Thy scolding dries my spittle. To the music of singers in past times 'twas fine, when we drank our fill of purest noble wine. Drinking freely of wine brings me no shame, if my behavior no boon companion would blame. For death no man can hold back. though the drink he perfumed potions of the quack. Nor monk in his secluded cell on high, where the vulture round his head his nest doth fly. Have you heard of Rumdun's towers? From the mountain top it lowers, well carpeted with stones for stay, plastered with clean, damp, slippery clay. Oil lamps within it show at evening like the lightning's glow. Excuse me. Besides its wall, the palm trees fine, with ripening fruit in clusters shine. This once new castle is ashes at today. The flames have eaten its beauty away. Dhunawas humbled, gave upon his castle great, and warned his people of their coming fate. Right. With reference to that, Ibn Athirba, Athaqafi said, by the life, there's no escape for a man when death and old age seize him. By the life, a man has nowhere to flee, no asylum. Could there be, after Himyar's tribes were destroyed one morn by calamity stroke, a thousand was with spearmen glittering like the sky before rain. Their cry deafened the chargers, and they put to flight the warriors with their pungent smell, witches as the sand in number, the very sap of trees dried at their approach. Amr ibn Ma'di Kerib az-Zubaydi said concerning a dispute which he had with Qais ibn Makshuh al-Muradi, when he had heard that he had threatened him, and bringing to memory the glory of the lost Himyar. Right, so he's just mentioning various poems where people were referring to this period in Yemeni history before the Abyssinians came in. Did you threaten me as though you were Dhu Ru'ain or Dhu Nuwas in the days of their prime? Many a man before you was prosperous, with a kingdom firmly rooted among men, ancient as the days of Ad, exceeding fierce, overcoming tyrants. Yet his people perished and became a wanderer among men. So now how Abraha seized power in the Yemen and killed Aryat. Aryat held sway in the Yemen for some years, and then Abraha, the Abyssinian, who was in his army, disputed his authority, and the Abyssinians split into two parties, each claiming supporters. When war was about to begin, Abraha sent to Aryat asking him to avert the danger of internation. I don't know how to pronounce this word. Can somebody help me? Internecine, presumably the people killing themselves, war, and inviting him to settle dispute by personal combat, and the winner to be the sole commander of the army. Aryat agreed, and Abraha went forth. So he says here, so far the oppression of the Union. Dos, so yeah, so Dos basically, so Dhu Nawas takes over. So basically, the Yemen is exchanging hands. Dos gets help from Abyssinia. Abyssinia comes and takes over the whole place, right? Which people do, right? So they're not there just to help. It's an opportunity to take over, right? So I'll come and help you, but I'm actually taking over, right? So the Negus did in fact send forces, which expelled the Nawas, but right, so yeah, and then they took over the whole place. So now the place is now under Abyssinian occupation. Okay. When the war was about to begin, Abraha sent to Aryat. Okay. Aryat agreed, and Abraha went forth to meet him. He was a short man holding the Christian faith, and Aryat advanced against him with his spear in hand. His spear in hand. He was a big, tall, handsome man. Abraha had a young man called Atauda at his back to defend him against attack from the rear. Aryat raised his spear, striking at Abraha's skull and hitting him on the forehead, splitting his eyebrow, nose, mouth, eye, and mouth. It was for this reason that he was called Ashram, the split face. Thereupon Atauda, coming out from behind Abraha, attacked Aryat and killed him. and Aryat's army joined Abraha. So he basically cheated. He cheated in the duel. That's what happened. And the Abyssinians in the Yemen accepted him as their chief. Then Atawda cried, Atawda, you see, if an you see of an evil company, parentless, parentless in nobility, meaning that Abraha's slave had killed Aryat. Al-Ashram asked, he's now called Al-Ashram, asked what he wanted, for he had killed him, for though he had killed him, blood money must be paid. He asked, and he obtained from him the right of prime noctis. I don't know what that means. The first night? That means something prime noctis, the first night. Abraha paid blood money for killing Aryat. All this happened without the knowledge of Negus. That's what Tabari adds. I don't know what this means. Can somebody look it up? The right of prime noctis. I'm not sure what that means. It's the right of a king to a bride's first night at his will. Oh, okay. But how is he going to give that to him if he killed him? Ashram asked, I told it you. I'd like to see the Arabic because maybe I'm losing something in the English. Al-Ashram asked what he wanted, although he had killed him. He asked and obtained from him. It seems like it's saying that Ashram, he's saying basically because you killed that man, I will, and you basically saved my life. When I get married, you can have the first night with my bride or something like that, which is pretty weird. Does that make sense? Something of that sort. I'd like to see it in the Arabic, right? So, oh, his choice of any of the land's brides. Ah, that's what it makes sense. So basically, I saved your life. Now you're in charge. Let me marry who I want, right? Because you're the king of the land. That would make sense. Yeah. Anyway, great. Um, I'm just going to tell a story about this actually. It's interesting. So there's a story in the Maqamat. There's a story just quickly. Give me 1 second, please. I need to send a reminder on another group. 1 second. Sorry, I was on the mute. So the story of the first night. So there's a man and he's talking to his wife and he's telling her some lines of poetry, how beautiful she is. And she's like this and she's like this and she's like this, she's like this. And then she says, I'm nothing compared to so and so. Says, who's so and so? She's your cousin. You don't know about her? I say, no. And then she describes this woman, describes his cousin to him. And he's like, how did I not know about my cousin? I had no idea. So then he goes to his uncle and says, uncle, why didn't you tell me that you had a daughter that I could marry? He says, oh, no one's going to marry my daughter. Say, why? Because the only way to marry my daughter is you have to kill this lion. And once you kill this lion, you have to go and kill this snake. And once you kill the snake, then you can go and you can go and milk this camel, which is in this valley that nobody can ever get to. And nobody's ever done it, basically. So anyway, so he says, okay, I'll do it. So it's kind of like between verse and poem is a story, right? Between prose and poem, describing what's happening. And he goes and single-handedly kills this lion, right? Basically, when the lion met the lion, right? The metaphorical lion met the real lion. He kills a lion. He rips he with his hand he rips what's it called, the tongue of the snake out and kills it, and then he goes and milks this camel and gives it to the dad. That's the dowry. So then he says, I've done what you've asked, like I've done these, whatever, the task of Hercules, whatever it is. So I want your daughter now. So then he says, okay, fine, you can marry her. And then on the wedding night, the sunnah was the basically you build the tent. That's called bana biha. You build your tent, which is going to be where you're going to live, and you put your horse outside of your tent. And whoever wants to challenge you for your wife, um, uh, yeah, whoever wants to challenge you for your wife, he goes and sits on your horse. So then this little kid, some kind of young teenager, goes and sits on the horse. And he's like, kid, like, I've just like single-handedly, without a weapon, wrestled a lion to death. I strangled this snake that's really, really deadly and that nobody survives. And I've done the impossible. Do you think just don't even, I don't want to harm you. Just get off the horse. And the kid's like, no. He's like, kid, I don't want to harm you. Get off the horse. The kid says no. So then the kid says, like, I'll fight you. He's like, bro, I don't want to kill you. It's not fair. So this kid or this young teenager fights the man, and within 3 seconds, the kid has the man on the floor and the sword to his throat. So then the man says, okay, I mean, go ahead, you can take her then. She's yours. And but first tell me who you are first, right? And he says, who are you? He says, I'm your son from the other woman. So basically, that's why you have this phrase in Arabic, هذا الشبل من ذاك الأسد. That this lion cub is from that lion, right? Basically, the only person who could beat him was his own son, right? So it's a healthier version of the Oedipus complex, right? The Oedipus complex is very disturbing and weird and awkward, whereas this is a bit of a healthier sort of thing. Like, if you have a son, if you have a better right to marry her than me, fine, and you've proven yourself, so go ahead, you know. So anyway, that's the story, right? That's a phrase in Arabic. Inshallah, we'll stop there, and perhaps it's something to do with that. Inshallah, we'll come back to this, inshallah, later. Inshallah, we're probably going to get to us Am al-Fil, inshallah, next week. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.